You wake up 2 days after a workout or a hike and you can barely sit down on the toilet. Is that normal? Or does that mean that there's something wrong? That's what we're unpacking in today's blog. One of the things that came up time and again in the short mini-series we've just finished on metabolic health was the importance of muscle. So today we're going to look at how muscle really adapts and what that feels like, what you can expect, how you can work with it. And we're even going to hopefully debunk a myth that just doesn't seem to want to die. So like all other tissue in your body, muscle responds to load, which means that when you give your body a stimulus, your body responds by adapting in response to that stimulus. So for muscle, that means asking it to do slightly more than it currently can, so working slightly outside of your current capacity, and then recovering and resting to allow your body to build your muscle back even stronger. So let's unpack a little bit more, get into the science of what that actually looks like practically. So muscle is contractile tissue, which on the most basic level means that there's protein fibers in there that slide into each other, which is what makes the muscle shorten and what moves your body. So if you think about your bicep, when it shortens, your arm moves up towards you, and when it lengthens, you release your arm back down. So each muscle cell in your body is a long, fine cell, and we call it a muscle fiber. And inside that fiber, you've got a whole bunch of just different units of those contractile proteins that link together. And then you have multiples of those fibers next to each other that form up the bulk of the muscle. So each little unit inside that muscle, you can almost imagine that there is an end plate on the fibers, and then on this side as well, and you have two different kinds of fibers. You have the myosin and the actin, and the myosin pulls the actin actively over it to contract through the muscle. So as multiple fibers next to each other do that, the muscle contracts and shortens. But when you're putting lots of stress through a muscle, so when you're asking it to do something slightly outside its current level of ability, particularly when the muscle is lengthening as you're contracting it, then you sometimes get what we call exercise-induced muscle damage, which means that there is micro trauma to the muscle after the exercise, and in this case, you have slight derangement of where those fibers sit, and particularly how the end plates work. So the end plate, we call it the Z line, so it's kind of like a protein membrane that some things connect to. Sometimes you get smearing or fuzziness of that when you look at it on a microscope, which means that there's been slight little damage to it, and then your body has to rebuild that afterwards. So what we talk about with this is not only is there that microscopic damage to the protein, but there's other changes that happen in the cell. So sometimes the cell membrane is disrupted, which means the way things move in and out of the cell change. And you also normally have calcium dysregulation happening in a muscle with exercise-induced muscle damage. And that is relating to how calcium is how your body starts a muscle contraction. So the nerve comes and talks to the cell, fires the impulse to the cell, and then the cell releases calcium, which is what actually kickstarts that contraction. So the three big things that happen is damage to the calcium, changes in the cell membrane or partial rupture in the cell membrane, and quite big changes to calcium regulation inside the cell. And then those changes, then your body needs to clean up. And that process takes a couple of days. And around the second day, you start finding you have a little bit of inflammation in the area, the cell gets a little swollen, and because there's inflammation, you sometimes even, not because of the inflammation, because of the original damage, you sometimes have micro trauma to the capillaries that bring blood supply into the area. But even if not, those capillaries will bring the substances of inflammation into the area. So the muscle tissue becomes slightly inflamed. And it's that inflammation and that little bit of swelling that is typically associated with sort of that pain and that ache and that stiffness that you get 1 to 3 days after an intense bout of exercise. And we tend to colloquially refer to this as DOMS, which means delayed onset muscle soreness. And it's very normal, and it's linked to basically post-exercise soreness. If you'd like to understand the contractile tissue within the muscle a little better, I'm going to put some of the names into the blog post so you can just pop down there and understand what I'm talking about with Z lines and actin and myosin and those sorts of things. So when you have DOMS, you will have stiffness. So this sometimes means that your range will be a little less than normal. So if you normally comfortably touch your toes, you might struggle to touch your toes for a day or two after a big workout session where the muscles through the back of your legs are tight. You will also often find that there is a little bit of a decrease in strength and power for a few days after this. And the more intense the pain, then the more inhibitory the pain will be to muscle contraction. And then remember, there's also that slight micro trauma in the muscle. So the muscle itself is able to contract slightly less strongly across the whole muscle. So you want to allow time for your body to recover before you're loading it again, which is why people suggest that if you're doing a big workout, so it can be an intense cardio effort or it can be strength exercises, you take at least 2 or 3 days before exercising the same muscle group, because it allows that early recovery to take place, so you're not loading more micro trauma on top of other micro trauma. Not to say that you can't exercise through that phase. A little bit of exercise is great, and we'll chat about active recovery just now. But just be aware that your body has to rebuild and give it the space to do so. If you're mildly stiff, it's not going to impact a workout. You'll still be able to produce great power, and you'll still get great benefit from the workout. Right, now that you know what DOMS is, let's bust some myths. The biggest one, the one that I hear all the time, is it's just lactic acid. Spoiler, it's really not. So your muscle burns fuel, which is how you generate the energy that allows you to move. And this happens through a couple of different pathways, but on the most basic level, your body burns glucose, or it stores glycogen, which is a form of stored glucose, a changed molecule into the muscle, and then your muscle can mobilize those glycogen stores and use that to actively burn those sugars to produce energy, and then the energy is used in that contraction inside the muscle. So that system can happen in 2 different pathways. So the first one is if you're doing low, steady endurance type exercise, so going for a long walk or going for a gentle jog. And what happens is your blood supply brings oxygen to your muscles, and this will typically go up when you're exercising. So there'll be more blood coming to the muscles, and your muscles will absorb more oxygen from it. But the oxygen moves into the muscle cell, the muscle fiber, and then that oxygen, you basically have an oxidization process of the glucose, which produces energy. But when you're exercising at a high intensity level, what happens is the oxygen supply can't match the energy demand within the muscle. So then we move into what we call anaerobic exercise. So aerobic exercise is when we're burning the oxygen to provide the fuel, but when we don't have enough oxygen, then we move into a cycle that doesn't use oxygen to do that. And what happens in that state is we still break down glucose to create the energy, but instead of it breaking down into simple compounds that our body can just get rid of, it forms lactate or lactic acid. And it basically indicates that there's a little bit of an oxygen debt. And interestingly enough, when you stop exercising, your body will continue to pump blood in through the muscles. You'll have oxygen coming back to the muscles. The lactate will diffuse through the cell membrane of the muscle and out into the blood, and your body will deal with that lactate. And that oxygen debt recovery only takes about an hour after you finish exercising. So that stiffness that's coming on a day or 2 after exercise is definitely not related to that lactic acid buildup in the muscle. What you might notice with the lactic acid, if you're training at a very high intensity, so we're thinking about doing like short sprints or something along those lines, when you top out with lactic acid, that's often that feeling of hitting a wall. So you just feel like your body suddenly loses energy and your muscles aren't working anymore. That might be related to that. But that stiffness the day or 2 after exercise isn't actually lactic acid. So myth number 2, if there's no soreness, it was a wasted workout. So interestingly enough, DOMS can happen on a very small level, or it can happen on a more noticeable level. We've mentioned a few times that it comes on a while after you train, and that time period can vary, but just because you're not stiff the day after a workout doesn't mean that you haven't provided enough stimulus to your body to change. But you get different kinds of workouts. So you get maintenance workouts, workouts where you are keeping your body at the level where it is, and actually quite a big percentage of our workouts can sit at that level, and then roughly 20% of the time we should be pushing our body beyond what it can do, and that can be from a cardiovascular point, and that can also be from a strength point. And when we push it beyond those parameters of what it's currently capable of, that's when we encourage it to adapt, and that's when change happens. And it's after those workouts that we should expect to have a little bit of stiffness the next day, but the amount of stiffness you have doesn't indicate, that you've done enough, and you actually don't have to kill yourself with a workout. So if you think about what we explained in terms of the exercise-induced muscle damage, if you overdo that, that is when you start getting breakdown in a muscle. And that muscle breakdown is not actually something that we want. So you want to either be comfortable the day after exercise, or you want a little bit of stiffness that comes in maybe from around 12 hours, peaking within 1 to 2 days after training, and then tapering back down. But if we think back to the myth, no stiffness or no pain after exercise doesn't mean that the exercise was ineffective. And then the last myth I want to take on is the idea that stretching will prevent DOMS. So some people say you should stretch before you work out, some people say you should stretch after you work out, and people say that particularly stretching after you work out will decrease the DOMS that you have after the fact. And also, not actually true. So if you think about the micro trauma in the muscle, that's already happened with a workout. So stretching at the end of a workout isn't actually going to change that, or do anything about how that process happens. Gentle mobility can be helpful just to allow your body to calm down. Stretching at the end of the workout actually is the most effective time to stretch if you're hoping to gain some flexibility. So stretching is a great thing to do, but it isn't necessarily going to, it isn't going to decrease the amount of DOMS that you have after a big workout. So the big question, should you still be stiff 2 days after a workout, or are you injured? What is normal when it comes to that soreness and stiffness after exercise? So if you have overdone it, either just genuinely by doing too much through a whole workout session, or if there's been one moment in the workout session that's overtaxed a particular part of a muscle, you can actually get muscle injury. So that can happen in 2 ways. You can get like wider muscle breakdown, or you can get a sprain or strain of a muscle, or even in extreme cases, a complete tear or rupture of a muscle. So when you look at normal exercise stiffness, so DOMS, you might feel tired at the end of the workout, and over sort of the next 12, possibly even 6 hours, you might start noticing your body starting to feel a little bit stiff and a little bit heavy. If it's happening quicker, so if you notice pain while you're exercising, or as soon as you cool down, you have an area of pain in a muscle, that normally suggests that there's actually a little bit of damage. And then what happens with the two of them over the next little while is also quite helpful to understand what's going on. So DOMS, you will find that the pain will slowly start to peak over 24 to 48 or even to 72 hours. So we talk about DOMS 1 to 3 days after a big exercise session, whereas pain from muscle injury will come on much quicker, and it will be sore. The biggest thing with looking at those is DOMS tends to be more of a diffuse ache, so you're stiff and you're tight through the whole muscle, whereas muscle injury, so a strain or a tear, tends to be quite localized. So it'll be one little area, one muscle, one part of a muscle. You might find it's on the inside or the outside of your leg, and you'll be able to almost point to the exact spot that most of the pain sits at. So that's quite a big indication that it's an injury rather than just stiffness after exercise. And then you'll also notice a few other things. So if you have an injury, you'll have pain with all kinds of movement. You'll find moving doesn't give you any form of relief. Whereas with DOMs, gentle movement often encourages your body to relax a little. It won't necessarily take the DOMs away, but as you gently start going for a walk or something like that, your body will often relax into it. The blood supply going through will ease things a little. And then the other thing to bear in mind is if you see anything on a muscle, so any redness or over a day or two some bruising coming out, then it's definitely not DOMs. Then there's more change that's happened within the muscle, and you need to have it looked at. DOMs will be tended to the touch, but you won't actually see any changes to color. You won't see swelling, you won't see bruising, and you definitely won't see sort of like gapping in the muscle, so like a little dent in the area. That would suggest that there's relatively significant muscle trauma. So basically what we're saying is you'll notice localized pain, you'll feel it when it happens, or you'll feel it as soon as you're cooling down, and you'll have pain with all movements if you've actually done some damage. And then I'd suggest you seek medical guidance to start addressing it early, because the way that you load it in the first few days will help how it recovers and how quickly it recovers over the next weeks. So what actually helps muscle recovery and helps you to get over that feeling of DOMs? Because it is microtrauma to the muscle, the biggest thing that needs to happen is that tissue needs to heal. As it heals, your body will build it back stronger and will be able to deal with slightly more capacity the next time around. But for that process to happen, it needs to heal. So the first thing is rest and recovery, and right at the top of the list is sleep. So after a big workout, you need 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Not a bad thing to chase in general if you have a high training volume. But particularly deep sleep allows physical healing in your body. And this is when growth hormone is released. And growth hormone is closely linked with healing muscles and even hypertrophy, so building back bigger, stronger muscles. Then you want to fuel as soon as possible after training. And ideally what you're looking for in terms of fueling is a combination of carbohydrate and protein within 30 to 60 minutes of the end of a workout. That means your body has the building blocks that it needs to start getting in there and healing. And remember we mentioned that your body stores glycogen into muscles. So that has to be replaced after you exercise. The oxygen debt gets paid off within about an hour of exercise, but your body is still working to rebuild those glycogen stores for 2 to 5 days after a big workout, and it'll be slightly longer when there is muscle trauma that's happened. So bear in mind, you need to be fueling your body to allow that to happen. And then hydration is also super important with that, just so that your body can actually flush out all of the waste products as it's cleaning, as it's healing, and as it's rebuilding. Then the next thing that comes in is active recovery. So we've got good rest, but active recovery means gentle, supportive movement. It could be breathing, it could be gentle stretching, it could be going for a gentle walk, and doing a easier day where you're supporting your body with comfortable movement the day after a big workout is a great way to go. If you are unsure where to start, or if you're kind of feeling a little uncomfortable in your body, or don't have a good relationship with it, there's been a bit of a breakdown in trust with your body, then my 3D Core and Breath Reset program is actually a great thing to use for your recovery days. It focuses on reconnecting breath, helping you to feel and engage your deep core, and just the breath-paced workouts, so they're not all breathing sequences into stretching, are quite a nice way just to build that awareness and presence in your body and let your body reset after a tough day. I'll give you the link below this video in the blog post. So the last thing I want to chat about here is ice and anti-inflammatories. So given that we want your body to rebuild back nice and strong, the first stage of healing is actually inflammation. That's that swelling and pain that you notice in a muscle a day or two after a big workout. And we want it to heal and we want it to build back stronger. So we don't actually want to get rid of that inflammation completely. Otherwise, studies are showing that you do get attenuation of the impact of that training session. And interestingly enough, ice baths and anti-inflammatories both tamp down that inflammatory response, and therefore can mean that you don't get the response that you're actually looking for out of that training session. So I would be cautious with standardly using anti-inflammatories after a workout. If something goes wrong and you're very sore and you need it for comfort, used occasionally, they can be helpful. And I feel the same way about ice baths. A day or two after a workout, alternating something cool and something warm to boost circulation and for comfort, amazing, great tool to use, but just be aware of the fact that you've asked your body to adapt and you want to allow that to happen. And the first stage that happens with that is inflammation. I've mentioned a few times already that if you overtax a muscle, you sometimes get more generalized muscle breakdown. This doesn't happen very often. It's called rhabdomyolysis. But when that happens, myoglobin gets released into your blood. It's very taxing for your kidneys. And if you're adding anti-inflammatories in on top of that, then it can actually cause a kidney crisis. So just be cautious of these things. If something feels unusual, seek medical advice rather than just self-treating and waiting to see what happens. Basically, the moral of the story here is that you don't want to attack and aggress your body. You want to challenge it, you want to build your strength, you want to build your confidence, and through that process, you want it to be asked a little more than it can cope with, give it time to recover and build stronger, ask more, allow it to recover, build stronger, and you want to challenge it to get strong. You don't want to overtax it on an ongoing basis. So basically it comes down to the fact that muscle soreness after exercise is information. So it tells you how your body is coping with the workout, how long it hangs around for, tells you just how hard you've pushed, and learning to feel what that stiffness feels like can build your confidence in listening to what your body is telling you, and into understanding what your body is doing for you as it builds strength and capacity for life. So start to listen to what your body's saying. Don't panic when you have pain, but just get curious. Is this generalized stiffness, general ache, dull ache, even if it's difficult to move, that can well just be muscle stiffness after exercise and can be entirely normal. So muscle is a really important tissue in our body, and it sets us up to be able to live a life with a high quality of life now, and gives us good metabolic well-being now, and both are protective into the future. And I really hope that this has helped you to understand how your body works a bit better, to understand how muscle adapts and makes you more confident in your body and what it can do for you. But get curious and let all of these things help you to rebuild a strong relationship with your body and help you build that trust and equip you to get out there and really live an active life that allows you to do the things that you really want to do with your life.